So the number one question on my mind is what will it take for South Africa 5 of the next 10 World Cups? So and somehow I convinced him to come to a baseball game at Yankee Stadium with me.
Wow.
And we literally sat there for 4 hours and just talked about this project and how it can work.
I guess this is going to be a wild ride, so are you ready?
I'm ready, let's do it.
Without replica, 9 provinces woven together as one. Stands a nation under the African sun. We are the Rainbow Nation, ready to show up for any occasion. 12 languages woven together as one. Stands a nation under the African sun. With grit and resilience, we strive for brilliance. With our big hearts, we are ready to share.
Welcome back to Karoo Kiwi. Today's guest is a perfect example of the global SAFA spirit in action. He's not just thriving in one lane, he's building highways in several. He's tackling the tech skills gap in South Africa, leading a community of top entrepreneurs in Canada, and running a successful local business. I'm thrilled to introduce Justinus Adriaanse. He's the co-founder of the revolutionary non-profit We Think Code, president of the entrepreneurs organization Canada Bridge, and a franchise owner of 10 Tommy Guns original barbershops, and lately co-host of his podcast project with former Springbok Flip van der Merwe called Winning the Away Game. Justinus, a massive welcome. For a guy that is also in the business of haircuts, you wear an incredible number of hats.
Yeah,
Let's start there.
Thanks,
What hat are you wearing today? Yeah, what hat are you wearing today? And what's that one thing that connects all of these ventures for you?
The one hat I'm wearing today is I want to build organizations and a society that's more equal, because I strongly believe that a more equal society will create opportunity for all and uplift. Like if the rising tide will lift all boats. So, and everything I do, I try and look for people with massive talent without access and create access as much as we can, because those interventions create life-changing opportunities.
Oh, that's brilliant. And where do you find yourself today?
So today I'm at home. It's a nice Friday afternoon in London, Ontario, about 2 hours outside of Toronto.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, you have a brilliant story and you're coming a long way. You've spent all of these years in Canada already, built up great businesses, helped the community, set up entrepreneurs organizations. I guess this is going to be a wild ride, so are you ready?
I'm ready, let's do it.
So just before we go, let's do a sort of a rapid fire, quick questions, quick answers. Bigger challenge, building a tech non-profit from scratch or making a local franchise business a success?
No, non-profit.
Which is the bigger challenge?
Sure. No, the non-profit for sure.
And why? Can you elaborate?
When you try and build a non-profit, it's very easy to get people excited about what you're doing, but it's very hard for them to open their wallets and help you do it.
Exactly.
When you do a franchise business, you do it because you're part of an ecosystem where a lot of those problems have already been solved, and it's more about putting it all together and getting it going. So. Yeah, starting the We Think Code was definitely a massive challenge.
Brilliant. The next one is social impact or profit margin. So if you could optimize for one, which would it be?
Social impact, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess that's where your heart is at, eh?
No, absolutely. And I think part of the reason... And it's a deceiving answer, and it's a deceiving answer because I also believe that social impact is best achieved when you have a self-fulfilling entity that can be sustainable. And that's one of the massive debates we had at the beginning of We Think Code. Should we do it as a business or should we do it as an NGO? And eventually we actually decided, almost in a combination of the two, saying we're going to do it inside an NGO entity, but we're going to think about it, and we're going to do it like it's a business. We're going to employ people and pay them good salaries. We're going to build a product that the market wants, and we're going to look for customers that really want, so that it can become self-sustaining. So, but the social impact and doing things because you want to make the world a better place, I think is fundamental to my approach.
For sure. Yeah. Good. So where did you learn your best business lesson? From a book or past mistakes?
No, definitely. I mean, I read a lot. I read usually 3 or 4 books a month, and I've learned lots from that.
That's amazing.
But learning from your own mistakes and learning on, especially about mistakes I made relative to people, not giving them enough space to do what they need, or being too controlling, or learning from mistakes is just it, because often you hear the solution in a book, audiobook, or you read about it in a book, but it doesn't touch, you don't get to that. It's very hard to get to that point where you actually change your paradigm and you embrace the ideas completely. When you have
it's not practical yet. When
you learn from your own mistakes, there's nowhere to hide, and you have to face the reality and change your perception.
It's that transparency that we talked about.
Yep.
Okay, the last one. So what is your deal making fuel? Is it a coffee in a boardroom or a beer after hours?
I would go for secret option number 3, which is find a way to spend quality time with somebody. And one of the things I'm working on now is sort of a rugby related project, and the way one of the first people I spoke to about it was Bobby Skinstad, and I didn't know him from anything, so I contacted him over LinkedIn, and he said he was going to be in New York, and somehow I convinced him to come to a baseball game at Yankee Stadium with me.
Wow.
And we literally sat there for 4 hours and just talked about this project and how it can work. And I mean, I would have never been able to have 4 hours of his time in a normal setting, but because I created this opportunity for us to go do something that he had never done and always wanted to do, we got 4 hours together, sitting a little bit in the rain at times, but we got to talk about it. So creating opportunities to spend time with people that is outside the normal rhythm of life, I think creates massive opportunities to build relationships, to connect to people, and to really come up with wonderful ideas.
Small magical moments, eh? So did you fly down to New York, or where was this game?
Yeah, I was in Yankee Stadium, New York. So I flew from here to New York for a day or two, and we did that.
Jeez, some people's lives are just so interesting. Look at my green envious shirt. But anyway,
awesome, man.
Luckily,
I like it.
Luckily, it's a Springbok.
But it's a Springbok, but it holds. I've got one of these as well. One of But yours is definitely worth more, because you're much braver walking outside in New Zealand in a Springbok shirt than I am in Canada. Here, people don't even know what it is. In New Zealand, they will know what it is. They might respect you, but they also won't necessarily like you.
The people, they're sometimes just too nice here. They won't say a thing. But anyway.
Are you enjoying the Kiwi life, but have a financial headache stuck back in South Africa? Getting your rands and blocked funds home can be complicated. All that SARS and SARB compliance, it's a lot to handle. That's where FinSelect comes in. We manage the entire process for you, making the transfer of your funds to New Zealand simple, smooth, and secure. Bring your money home hassle-free. Visit finselect.co.nz and get started today.
Let's move on. So let's just talk about the foundation, the purpose-driven innovator that you are. Let's start with We Think Code. It's a powerful story. What was the core problem you saw in South Africa that sparked the fire to create a tuition-free tech university?
Great question. I think the spark was really just Nelson Mandela. Literally, around the time I had left Bright Property, we had gone to Canada for the winter to ski, and we came back, and I went to
Yeah.
Chicago to learn to program myself. And when I came back from Chicago, was around the time Nelson Mandela got sick, and
Yeah.
I really felt this deep desire to do something to play my part in building a better country. So Yossi, a friend of mine that I met at Gibbs, we started talking, and initially we thought we wanted to do something about entrepreneurship and trying to help entrepreneurship, but that
Yeah.
is a space a lot of people work in. And then when I came back from Chicago, and in the space of 3 months, I felt like I had gained a superpower, because now I was able to command a computer and make it do really what I wanted to. I said to him, Yossi, I think there's an opportunity to do more something around that. And I think the two fundamental assumptions we started from was, one, is that the aptitude and the ability to be a world-class software developer is normally distributed. So in any given community in South Africa, it doesn't matter where or how rich or how poor it is, there's going to be a percentage of people who are going to be phenomenal software developers. The problem is, in an unequal society like South Africa, a lot of people are like that, but they don't even know it. They don't have access to the tools they need to do it, etc. So,
resources.
The idea was, if we can remove every single obstacle so that we can really just pick the people most likely to be successful at it, what can we build? And the story is amazing. I mean, most years now, we get 80,000 applications at WeThinkCode. Wow. We follow a process where we can whittle through them down to the 500 kids with the highest talent that's most likely to be successful in the industry. So the people we get are like the top one, better than the top 1% of people to do this.
Exactly.
And what's amazing is we've been able to literally represent the demographics of the country in the student body. We've got more than 50% female students. We've got 80% black students, and the quality of the people is amazing. And to see them develop, they walk in there on day one, they're a little bit shy, they're a little bit hesitant, they lack a bit of confidence. And at the end of the program, they walk out there with confidence. They know what they're able to do. They can have impact immediately when they walk into the place of work. It's like my favorite day of the year, every year, is to go to graduation in Johannesburg and just see the unbridled joy of the students and their families on what they've been able to achieve.
Must be amazing.
And how they're ready to take on the universe.
Wow, what an incredible story. And that's from a bright spark moment, thinking that you want to make a difference. It's amazing. And you come down each year for the graduation, you say?
Oh yeah, no, I come every year for the graduation. I mean, the timing is perfect because it's usually in August, and in August there's usually a few fun test matches in South Africa that I have to
nice.
as well. But yes, we always end up in South Africa in August.
Justinus, you are driving this incredible South African mission while living and building businesses in Canada. So how do you stay connected and lead a social enterprise from the other side of the world? This is a challenge that many in our audience actually face. So how do you do it?
So I think the first distinction that's important is I don't lead it. I've never really led it. I just help found it and get it away. I still serve on the board, but we have the most incredible people. I mean, Nyari, who's been the CEO for the last 5 or 6 years, is just one of the most amazing human beings I have ever met. She's one of those, she's a relatively small person, but the ability, the passion, like one of the most amazing experience I've ever had is I did a review for her 1 year, and I had to talk to all of the staff and to hear the amazing things that she's helped them with and developed the people. So we have the most amazing team, and it all came from early on. There's this TED talk that is the way we think about nonprofits is wrong. And one of the things he talk about is that non-profits isn't always staffed with the best people for the job, and we tried to be very intentional from the beginning, and we've succeeded at
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and we failed at times, but we've really tried to make sure we get amazing people in there to run it, and Yari and the team that she's built around her has been absolutely phenomenal.
They say dynamite comes in small packages, right? Yeah. What is the single biggest lesson that you've learned from the nonprofit world that has made you a better, more effective leader in your for-profit businesses?
So probably that book back there called Hidden Potential talks about it as well. Let's say often in the for-profit or a sort of a meritocracy where we only looking for the best for every given situation. We are really assessing the best based on a snapshot in time. Okay. The problem with doing that is that we don't know what the origin story and what the trajectory was up to that point. For example, let's say we have two candidates looking at a specific position, and we rate both of them as an 8 out of 10 for this position. But what we're not necessarily considering is that last year, the one candidate might have been a 4 and the other candidate was a 7. So one candidate has grown in a year from 7 to 8, and the other candidate has grown from 4 to 8. So which one of those two is now better? Now it seems obvious maybe it's the one that's grown from 4 to 8 rather than 7.
Yeah, with the biggest difference, yeah.
But what if we say, listen, today the snapshot is different. The one who was 7 last year is now 8, and the one who was 4 last year is now a 7. Now it's a little bit harder to determine which one is better and which one is going to be better in the long term. So what I think the nonprofit space, and specifically we Code has taught me is to look at the trajectory more than the snapshot in time. So instead of just looking where somebody is today, is where were they a year ago, where were they 5 years ago, and are they increasing or improving faster than the other person that might still be ahead at the moment, but it's inevitable that they will overtake them.
So, I mean, this was not part of the questions, but do you ever come across where you see people hit a ceiling? Because I know that people can grow up to a certain point where others are sort of the sky's the limit, you know?
Absolutely. And there's actually a book about it. It's called the Peter Principle, which says that people are promoted to the level of incompetency. So people get promoted until they eventually get promoted to a level where they cannot cope and figure out what to do. So that absolutely does happen as well.
Okay.
I think that the biggest thing there for me as well is being able to judge people on their ability to improve and learn, because often people who hit that ceiling is people who's always had a capability at a certain level, and their duties was always less than the capability. So they've never learned to really grow. I mean, it's a little bit like, I don't know if it happened to you, but growing up, like in standard 5 or grade 7, our rugby team had 2 of these massive guys. And the entire game plan was built around getting the ball to that guy, because we knew if we had got it to him, he would be able to go score a try. The problem is when you learn to play rugby like that and you're the big guy, you don't really learn how to do many of the things that you are going to need to be able to do once everybody is big.
Exactly.
And often the guy who ends up really playing well by the time he's big is the guy who, like Siya Kolisi, actually, I never knew, but this was part of his story. So his puberty hit a little bit late. So he had to be clever about his game and learn how to play a clever game, because he was much smaller than his peers. And then by the time he went through puberty and he really became much bigger, now he was big, but he had also already learned how to be clever and strategic and do all those things. So a lot of people who run into the Peter Principle are the people who are big, and when they get to the stage where everybody is big, they don't know how to win. Whereas if you've risen because you were small and you had to dogfight your way up, and now you've actually become big as well, now you can compete on a much bigger stage.
Yeah, I had the exact same experience. We had guys in primary school that was this big guys, but when we came to matric, you know, playing first team, they fell out of the bus. So yeah, exactly. Makes sense.
That's a very practical example of that Peter
Yeah.
principle, and that's exactly the dynamic behind it.
Yeah, yeah. Moving on to, from coding to cutting hair, that's quite a pivot, right? So why did you choose the franchise model of Tommy Guns barbershops instead of starting your own independent brand?
Because I know nothing about hair cutting. I mean, I think
I can see from your haircut,
yeah. My haircut's not very complicated because there's not much there. So actually, it wasn't really about the business at all. It was really about the relationship. And I think that's also part of the struggle when you move country, is you starting a brand new network, right? You went to school with people in South Africa, you went to university, you've been in church, like you know all these people.
Correct.
And then you move to a new country and you know nobody. So one of literally the first people I met living in Vernon was Keenan from Tommy Guns, and we built a relationship. And eventually the opportunity came to buy one of the franchises, and we did, and it just really worked well, and it kept building and building from there. So it was really the relationship and the proximity to the business that allowed me to see it, to admire it from a distance, and eventually get involved.
That's amazing. So I went and have a look at their website, and they create, or you create, an experience for somebody coming sitting to have the haircut. It's getting that drink, or watching your favorite sports game or something on the screen in front of you. That's some of the things I saw. What else is contributing to the experience that you can maybe share quickly?
Yeah, I think the entire model is about creating the experience, making sure that the guest, they come for a haircut, but they leave satisfied with the time that they've spent. I mean, before we owned the first barbershop, I had never gotten a shave by anybody else. Now I try and go as often as I can, because it's the most relaxing 40 minutes of my week, is sitting there in the chair and just experiencing the whole process. By the way, I don't know if you saw, but Tommy Guns opened up in New Zealand not long ago. There's 2 locations in Auckland.
Okay.
And I haven't spoken to them about it, but my assumption is they want to grow. They've also got I think 10 or 15 locations in Australia. So it's a really fascinating business model.
I'll definitely look into that. Yeah. So what's the key to running a successful franchise? I mean, how do you balance following the franchisor's proven system while still injecting your own leadership style and building a great sort of local team culture? So how do you make it your own? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the entire challenge. I'm blessed in the Tommy Guns business that I have a few great partners that does a phenomenal job. But I think the balance is definitely, and that's why franchise businesses, you have to know, you have to be conscious of what you're doing. You're starting your business within a system that has massive benefits, but also has some constraints. And I struggle with that sometimes, especially because I've been involved in many businesses that hasn't been in that context where you have a lot more freedom. But those, I mean, that's part of the choice you make when you get involved with franchise business, and that gives you lots of benefits. But the lack of being able to do everything you might want to do in the exact moment you want to do it is part of the price you pay to be in a franchise system.
Exactly. Yeah. So being the president of EO Canada Bridge, you're in the trenches with other high growth.
Right now, I'm former president. So I was president
former president.
Year.
So, well,
I'm not president
you've been in that seat.
I was last year.
You've been in that seat, yeah. So you're in the trenches with other high growth entrepreneurs. What are the common blind spots or challenges you see South African entrepreneurs face when they enter a new competitive market like North America or Canada, then, for that sake? What challenges do you see? Yeah.
I think that for me, one of the things for me was just getting to grips with the unbelievable size and purchasing power that you have here. Like, in South Africa, I would have never even dreamed of doing a
Yeah.
barbershop business. Never mind doing the first one in a town with where only 50,000 people live. But
Yeah,
like
wow.
50,000 people here, the spending power is just absolutely
Yeah.
enormous. So,
Yeah.
so for me, that mind shift was definitely challenging. Is going from, and I mean that's interesting thing that I noticed in EO as well is in South Africa. Most of my EO friends had substantial businesses. I don't think there was ever anybody with like less than 20, 25 employees, right? When Canada,
Wow.
a
Yeah.
lot of my EO friends run businesses with 2 or 3 employees
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
so much less complexity and less staff to be able to build $1 million business in North America
Exactly.
compared to South Africa.
Yeah. I find the same sort of trend here in New Zealand. They are just way more effective with less people. But I think they are sort of forced into it because labor is very expensive. But they find the way around it, yeah, and they make it work. Yeah. So, Justinus, across all your roles, you obviously lead a diverse group of people. What's your core leadership philosophy? How do you empower people?
Have you watched Ted Lasso?
I haven't. No.
Okay, well, do yourself a favor. So about 2 years ago, I read
Yes.
this amazing book called Tribal Leadership. And the whole idea
Yes.
behind tribal leadership is to say that the most influential leaders is not the rock star CEO profile, but it's rather this people who have the ability to build a community, and the community basically make them the leader, and the people who can lead with empathy, and people who can create a context
Yeah.
where every voice can be heard. So after I read the book, I literally asked ChatGPT. I said, "Oh, I love this book. I really want to see a practical example of it. Can you suggest in pop culture a TV show or
Yeah.
a movie that shows an example of this?" And ChatGPT said, "I have to watch Ted Lasso," and it was the most amazing thing. Is
Ted
the premise
Lasso. I'll
behind
remember.
the premise behind the show is it's this wealthy couple in the UK that owns a football club that's getting divorced, and the husband's like entire passion in life is this football club. He used to sneak in there as a kid, and then eventually when he made money he bought the club. But then in the divorce, the wife gets ownership of the club, and as a way to try and get back at her husband for the divorce, she decides she wants to ruin the club. And she thinks that she's going to ruin it by firing the coach and getting a new coach that doesn't know anything about football. So she actually hires a college American football coach from the US that doesn't even know the rules of soccer to become the coach of the soccer club in the UK. But what she didn't realize is Ted's magical power isn't his knowledge about sport, but his leadership style and his ability to lead people.
Okay.
And the story is just absolutely fascinating.
Wow. Definitely gonna have a look at that. Yeah. Is it a series or a movie or what is it?
It's a series. There's 3 seasons at the moment. It's on Apple TV Plus, and they're busy filming the 4th season, which hopefully will be out next year.
Okay. Interesting. So, being a Safa yourself, what is the one cultural superpower you believe South Africans bring to international stages?
Oh, I would probably say grit. I mean, I think what the interesting thing is we all want to optimize our lives for as little adversity as possible. But the adversity is actually what teaches us so much determination, ambition, staying power, grit, everything that comes with it. So growing up in an environment as challenging as South Africa really creates this most amazing people that can be determined. I mean, the way they talk about it in Chasing the Sun, when they talk about the 3 games in a row that we won by 1 point, and they talk about like going to the gutter and being able to fight it out. That is an amazing superpower. I think the challenge, though, is that the flip side of that is it's very hard for us to to lead with empathy and to be vulnerable. And
Yeah,
actually,
yeah,
when we can learn that skill as well, when we can lead with vulnerability and we can lead with empathy and we can combine it with that grit and the ability to keep going when the odds are stacked against us, those two things actually creates even more magic. So I think the positive side is definitely there, but then the thing that
yeah.
makes it even more powerful is being able to be vulnerable and lead with empathy as well.
That was exactly my next sort of question. Is on the flip side, what is that kryptonite? You know, that thing we need to manage and be aware of as South Africans building businesses abroad. And like you say, it's that vulnerability and knowing when to sort of not step back, but I mean to just take a new perspective. Because of the grit, we might not be sort of always wanting to be front in line, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting is I don't think it's, for me, the vulnerability manifests more in always needing to be right or always seem to be knowing what the answer is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't have to give up to say that we don't know. We can say, I'm going to keep going. I don't know what the answer is yet, but I'm not giving up. I'm going to figure out what it is. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling unsure, but I'm going to be just as determined and I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep taking the next step and I'm going to figure this out. Just because I'm willing to say I don't know the answer doesn't mean I'm going to give up.
Yeah, exactly. I cannot believe we're landing this plane now. So we're moving into the last part of our podcast. So, Justinas, I mean, you've built a life that spans social impact, community leadership, successful organizations, franchise businesses. So what's that single biggest piece of advice for South Africans abroad who has a great idea but is terrified to take that first step in an entrepreneurial space?
Wow, that's a great question. Because I think it's frightening. It's frightening in general to take the first step to be an entrepreneur. But we're in a new country where your network isn't as strong, and the fear of failure feels almost higher. I think the biggest advice I would have in that situation is you're more likely to regret not doing it than doing it. Because especially in first world environments, there's often safety nets and there's often the opportunity to go back and find a full-time job again if that you want to do. But the freedom and the opportunity for impact and the opportunity to be able to express yourself in a meaningful way in doing your own business, I think it's worth the risk most of the time. Now, obviously, it's different. The context is different. It's much harder to do when you have kids.
For each idea.
It's much harder to do when you're older than when you're younger. But, I mean, I was seeing the other day, like Ray Kroc only started McDonald's when he was 54, and Coronel Sanders only started KFC in his 60s. So maybe that's not even true that it's necessarily harder when we're older.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think it's true that the thing you said about being in a first world country, the opportunities to make mistakes are, there's more opportunity and you will be able to sort of fall back on something else. Definitely.
New Zealand doesn't have to be complicated. Simply Visa NZ helps employers and migrants navigate the visa process, from work and residence visas to visitors visas. Led by immigration lawyer Rain Visser, the team provides clear, honest advice, so clients always know what's needed and what comes next. Their goal is to make every move simple, stress-free and successful, because starting a new life in New Zealand should feel exciting and not overwhelming. Visit simplyvisa.co.nz, complete the online application form, and let Simply Visa NZ help you make your migration dream a reality.
So, what is next for Justinas? What aside from the podcast, you're doing the flip, which I'm very excited about. Is there a next big problem you're excited to solve, or a next venture that you can share with us?
Yep. So the number one question on my mind is, what will it take for South Africa to win 5 of the next 10 World Cups? So in 40 years' time, we can look back and we've won 9 World Cups. So that is the most important thing. And the reason I think actually that's so important for me is that the rugby becomes a proxy of actually building a society and a country that works for everybody.
Yeah,
the rugby competitive environment is such that we won't be able to fake it. We're either going to really improve the country, build a country that works for everybody. Because to be a professional rugby player, you need infrastructure, you need nutrition, you need education, you need a bunch of stuff that is fundamental to the infrastructure of society. So if we can do that, and I mean the way I always think about this is that ultimately we will either build a country that works for everybody, or we will end up with a country that works for nobody. So if we want to win 5 of the next 10 World Cups, we have to do more to move in the direction of building a country that works for everybody. So that's really what I'm passionate about and what I want to spend the rest of my career working on and figuring out how to do.
And I guess the likes of Rassie will not be there forever, so we need to find a replacement, you know.
I mean,
like-minded.
Rassie is obviously a national treasure, and what he's done has been phenomenal. But I think the key is the cycle for, I mean, even if you look at New Zealand in the last 10 or 20 years, the team runs like this up and down. What we need to figure out is there things we can do to make the cycle go like that still, but to the up and to the right? That the cycle in South African rugby will still always be there, because you'll have good years and you'll have bad years. But the overall trend line needs to be so much to the top right that it doesn't matter that we're in a down cycle, we can still be dominant. And I think we have the talent and the base and the opportunity, because I mean, the Eastern Cape is the most amazing freaking place. I mean, I read Sia's book and I couldn't believe the stories he was telling. So I literally jumped on a plane. I flew to the Eastern Cape and I went to some school games and I drove around, and literally the one Sunday morning, we were in the middle of nowhere in Stutterheim in the Eastern Cape. And we drove into town, and there was this rugby field next to the road, and behind around the rugby field was a small township, probably of about 3,000 people. And this was 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And we ended up driving to the rugby field, and as we were approaching it, it felt like I was driving into Siya Kolisi's book, because here in front of me was a game taking place, and it's everybody from a 12-year-old boy to a 40-year-old man playing. Half of them wearing shoes and half of them playing bare feet. And there was like 200-300 members of the community next to the field cheering the team on. So we stop and we get out and we start talking to the people. No, they say, this is just the first game of the day. There's in this little township of 3,000 people, there's 13 rugby clubs, and today on this field there's going to be 6 games. So like the opportunity to, if we can create for every boy that's playing on that field without shoes with 40-year-old men, if we can create the same opportunity for him to play rugby that I had growing up in the 80s and 90s in Pretoria East, we will produce talent and rugby players more than we can know what to do with, and we can win 5 of the next 10 World Cups.
I believe so, because I mean, we have such a strong base which has not even been delved into. There's so many more people that's possibly the next Siya Kolisi, you know. So,
but here's the key. Part of the things we need to do to exploit that is to change both the perception of South Africans abroad by South Africans in South Africa, and the perception of South Africa in South Africans abroad. So I think South Africans abroad actually is one of the greatest export and greatest assets that the country have. If we do this right and we create the right opportunities, I think what South Africans abroad would do for South Africa is insane. I actually literally just before this got off a call with a guy who left South Africa in 1990. He's been in the US for 35 years.
Wow.
And he still says every day when he wakes up,
yes,
the first thing that enters his mind is he wish he was in Cape Town.
Yeah. I'm getting chills.
35 years later. So
Wow.
the key is, I mean, I don't know if you know the story about Vincent May. So Vincent May
No.
left South Africa in 1965. So he's been gone for 50 years.
Yeah.
And
60 years.
yeah, when Nelson Mandela got elected in 1994, he wanted to do something to help the country, and he didn't know what to do. So he ended up phoning the school he went to and saying that he will pay for 5 students every year to attend that school. The only requirement is they have to come from the township outside Port Elizabeth. And he's been doing that for 30 years. And one of the kids that ended up on the bursary and went to that school because of what he did was Siya Kolisi.
Wow.
So the key is there's many South Africans who's been outside of South Africa for 10, 20, 30, 60 years. Those people still have this most amazing bond with South Africa, especially the Springboks. What's amazing is that often I talk to them and they become bigger Springbok fans once they leave South Africa than they ever were in South Africa.
Yeah.
Because the Springboks becomes this way for them to connect back to South Africa, to have easy conversations with their families.
Yes.
I mean, there's this podcast Roelof Botha did with who's the 4-hour work week guy? I can't remember his name now, but in any case, Roelof Botha from Sequoia had this interview with him, and he tells the story of how rugby becomes like the way he communicates with his father and his brothers and everybody still in South Africa. And I think that happens to a lot of us. It's like rugby becomes so much bigger because it's an easy way to feel part of something bigger and connected to South Africa.
Yeah, there's just something, and I hope it's not just because they're on a sort of a winning streak and on a high. I just hope, it's more than that. Do you think so?
I mean, I think, it'll go in cycles, so it will definitely be less when they don't win for 12 or 16 years. But I think the key is if we build this global community of South Africans who really want to give back, we can extend the streak for 40 years. Then, the bonds, it would be absolutely mind-blowing.
5 of the next 10, you said, right?
That's the goal. What do we need to do to win 5 of the next 10? So, and I mean, it feels like very ambitious, but if you look back right now, we've won 4 of the last 8. We've only ever played in 8, and we've won 4. So it's really about building the right systems and contributing in a way that makes it possible to maintain this record for an absolutely extended period of time.
Brilliant. We're all behind that, Justinus. So, make it happen and tell us where we can contribute.
Well, I'm sure that will come full circle.
Finally, where can people follow your journey and learn more about your incredible work that you're doing?
Yeah, best way is LinkedIn. That's where I really share most of my thoughts and we'll, as you said, we Flip and I are starting the podcast next week. We have some amazing guests lined up for our first 3 recordings next week. So we should have the first episodes released in November. So very excited. So follow the podcast and follow me on LinkedIn. That's where you'll be able to read. My wife actually jokes. She says the best way for her to keep up with everything I'm doing is to make sure she logs into LinkedIn every day to see what's happening.
Oh, man. Yeah, that happens. I just want to say thank you for sharing your blueprint for making a real impact. It's incredibly inspiring. And to our listeners, the lesson for me is that you can build success in your new home while still making a profound difference in the place that you left behind. All the links will show in the notes. And yeah, until next time, cheers and go well. And thank you, Justinas. It's been incredible.
Thanks for your time, man. I hope you have a great Saturday.
Thanks, man. Cheers.
Bye.
We are the Rainbow Nation, ready to show up for any occasion. 12 languages woven together as one, stands a nation under the African sun. With grit and resilience, whoa.